The skill file isn't relevant here. This is a pure creative writing task. Let me write the story directly. The car was still warm when she took a photograph of it, not as evidence, as a promise. The morning Corinna Marsh walked out of her front door to find a stranger's SUV parked squarely across her driveway. She did not scream. She did not pound on the hood or leave a note written in fury. She stood in the pale October light in her bathrobe and slippers, coffee mug in one hand, and she looked at that black Cadillac Escalade the way a surgeon looks at a problem, not with anger, but with the cold, precise intelligence of someone who has already decided what comes next. The vehicle was parked at an angle so deliberate it could only be intentional, its rear bumper kissing the edge of her property line, its front wheels turned inward as if the driver had wanted to make absolutely certain that no one, not Corinna, not a tow truck, not an act of God, could get out without moving it first. She had a 9 o'clock appointment at the county planning office 22 minutes away. She had a presentation that had taken her 11 days to build. She had a daughter she needed to drop at school in 40 minutes. And she had, blocking every single one of those plans, a vehicle with tinted windows, a vanity plate that read MNOI MKR1, and not a single human being inside it. Corinna Marsh was 43 years old. She had spent 12 of those years working as an urban land use consultant, which meant she knew more about property lines, easements, and municipal codes than most city attorneys. She had raised her daughter Waverly alone since Waverly was 4, had done it in this house on Aldermore Lane, a house she had purchased at auction after her divorce, had renovated herself room by room across 3 years of weekends, had turned from a condemned wreck into the most meticulously maintained property on the block. She knew her rights the way other people know their own names. She also knew, from 12 years of professional experience, that knowing your rights and being able to enforce them were two entirely different things. What Corinna understood, standing in that October morning stillness, was that whoever owned MNYMKR1 had counted on exactly that gap. She took the photograph. Then she went inside, made Waverly's lunch, got her daughter dressed and fed, called a neighbor named Petra to take Waverly to school, rescheduled her county appointment to 2 in the afternoon, and sat down at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and her laptop. She opened 4 browser tabs. She found the vehicle registration through a contact at the DMV she'd worked with on a zoning dispute 2 years earlier. She cross-referenced the plate against the county assessor's database, and within 19 minutes, she knew exactly who owned that Escalade, where they lived, what they owned, and, most importantly, who they were. The name attached to MNYMKR1 was Derek Tollison, 48, resident of 14 Briarfield Court, which was 3 blocks east and 1 block north of Aldermore Lane. A house worth, according to the current assessed value, $1.4 million. Tollison was the managing partner of Tollison Property Group, a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm that had, in the past 6 years, built 2 strip malls, a storage facility complex, and, Corinna's stomach tightened slightly when she found this, had submitted a preliminary development application to the county for a mixed-use project on the vacant lot directly adjacent to the elementary school 2 streets over from her own. She read through his firm's website. She read through 3 years of Planning Commission meeting minutes. She found his LinkedIn profile, his firm's registered agent filings, and a profile in a local business magazine from 8 months ago in which Derek Tollison was photographed leaning against, she almost laughed, a black Cadillac Escalade, grinning the practiced grin of a man who believed firmly that the world arranged itself around his comfort. She understood immediately, the vacant lot project. He'd been attending Planning Commission meetings for it, and the commission met on Tuesday mornings, which this was, at the municipal building 4 blocks from her house. He had parked on her street, walked to his meeting, and blocked her driveway because it was convenient. Because he could. Because the calculation he'd made was that by the time she figured out whose car it was and what to do about it, his meeting would be over. He'd drive away, and she'd be nothing but an irritated woman on a side street who'd lost a morning. Corinna closed the laptop. She refilled her coffee. She looked out the kitchen window at the black Escalade sitting across her driveway in the morning sun, and she made a decision that was not about anger. It was not about revenge in any petty sense. It was about the fact that Derek Tollison had looked at her property, her home, the thing she had built, and decided it was available for his use. And that was a category of mistake that Corinna Marsh had spent a lifetime learning to correct at the root. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to the city's non-emergency parking enforcement line, where she reported an illegally parked vehicle blocking a private residential driveway and requested documentation of the violation. The second was to a towing company, not the first one she found on a search, but a specific one operated by a man named Gerald Pewitt, whom she knew professionally because his yard was adjacent to a project site she'd consulted on 2 years ago. Gerald was licensed, bonded, meticulous about documentation, and had a particular dislike for what he called arrogance vehicles. The third call was to her own attorney, a compact, unhurried woman named Simone Achebe, to whom Corinna explained in 4 sentences what had happened and what she intended to do about it. "You're sure it's him?" Simone said. "I have the registration, the assessor record, and a magazine photo of him next to the same car," Corinna said. There was a brief silence. "All right," Simone said. "Keep everything, every photo, every call log, every receipt." "I know," Corinna said. Gerald Pewitt arrived at 11:14. Parking enforcement had already been by at 10:40, photographed the vehicle, and left a citation tucked under the wiper, a $75 fine for blocking a private driveway, which was, Corinna knew, essentially meaningless to a man like Derek Tollison. But it was documented, it was time-stamped. Gerald's truck pulled to the curb and Gerald himself climbed out, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a gray beard and a calm, professional manner that Corinna had always appreciated. "The one on the apron?" he said, nodding at the Escalade. "That's the one. Got the property deed?" She handed him a copy she'd printed. He photographed it alongside the vehicle, photographed the driveway obstruction, documented the parking citation still on the windshield, and hooked the Escalade with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times without drama. Corinna watched from the porch. There was no satisfaction in the watching. Not yet. This was not the satisfying part. This was the predicate. This was the first move in something that had a much longer shape. The Escalade left on the back of Gerald's flatbed at 11:31. Gerald's impound yard was 14 miles east of the city, technically in a different municipality, which meant retrieval required navigation of 2 separate administrative systems. Corinna knew this because she had asked Gerald specifically about his yard's location before she called him. The storage fee was $65 per day. The administrative release fee was $140. Getting the car out during business hours on a Tuesday meant driving 14 miles, paying $205 in addition to the parking fine, and doing it before 5 o'clock, when the yard closed for the day. If the car was not retrieved by 5, the next available pickup window was the following morning, with an additional day's storage. At 11:47, Corinna's phone rang. She did not recognize the number, but answered it. "Is this the woman who lives at 41 Aldermore?" The voice was male, confident in the way that men who are accustomed to being obeyed are confident, with the very faintest edge of irritation beginning to show through the professionalism. "This is Corinna Marsh," she said. "Who is this?" "My name is Derek Tollison. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't been," she said pleasantly. A brief silence. "Excuse me?" "There's been no misunderstanding. Your vehicle was blocking my driveway. It's been towed." Another silence, longer this time. She could hear, beneath it, the recalibration happening in real time. The moment when a man who expected a flustered apology and immediate capitulation encountered something else entirely. "Look," he said, shifting register slightly. "I was only parked there for a couple of hours. You were parked across my driveway from before 8 this morning until 11:31, she said. "I have time-stamped photographs. The parking authority has a citation on record. The tow is documented." That's completely unnecessary. I'm happy to come move it right now." "It's already gone," she said. "Gerald Pewitt Towing, 14 miles east on Route 9. They close at 5. The silence this time was different. She could hear the anger assembling itself behind it, the particular fury of a man who had made a calculation and discovered, too late, that it was wrong. "You had my car towed," he said, and now the pleasantness was gone. "I had an illegally parked vehicle removed from my property," she said, "which is my legal right. Do you know who I am?" It was the question she had been waiting for, not because she needed it. She was going to do what she was going to do regardless, but because it was clarifying, because it told her everything she needed to know about how Derek Tollison understood the world, which was as a place where certain people asked questions like that and other people answered them with deference. "Yes," she said, "I do." She hung up. The next 30 minutes were predictable. He called back twice. She did not answer. He left one voicemail that was controlled in its surface and furious in its undertone, explaining that he was a stakeholder in the local community, that this kind of response was disproportionate and unfriendly, that he hoped they could resolve this like reasonable adults. She saved the voicemail, transcribed it, and emailed the transcription to Simone with a note. "For the file." Then Corinna made herself lunch, reviewed the materials for her rescheduled county appointment, and thought carefully and without emotion about Derek Tollison, about his development application, about the planning commission meeting he'd attended that morning while his car sat across her driveway, and about the specific and significant distance between where he was right now and where she intended him to be. She was not a vindictive woman. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She had not chosen this. He had come to her house, metaphorically, literally, and helped himself. And Corinna had spent 43 years building a life in which the things she built were hers, which meant she had also spent 43 years learning to defend them. The car being towed was not the lesson. The car being towed was just the opening statement. She drove to the county planning office at 1:15. Her presentation went well. She stayed afterward to look through a set of public comment files related to a different matter, a variance request for a commercial property 3 miles from her home. And while she was there, entirely by the logic of professional habit, she pulled the file on Tollison Property Group's pending development application. She read through it thoroughly. She took notes. She found 4 items that she marked with small, careful asterisks in the margin of her notepad, and did not show to anyone. She drove home at 4:40. The driveway was clear and empty and entirely hers. She stood in it for a moment, just standing, before she went inside. The October light had gone amber and long. The street was quiet. Somewhere up the block a sprinkler ran, and a dog barked twice at nothing, and the ordinary, beautiful, unremarkable machinery of a neighborhood turning toward evening went on all around her. She went inside. She fed the cat. She started dinner. At 5:12, Petra brought Waverly home, and Waverly burst through the door carrying a papier-mâché solar system that had taken 3 weeks and was missing Venus, and Corinna set aside everything. The file, the notes, the 4 asterisked items, the growing architecture of what she was building, and sat at the table with her daughter and listened to the detailed and urgent account of Venus's disappearance during second period. And she laughed when Waverly laughed, and was present completely, the way she was always present for this part of the day, because this part of the day was the part that everything else was for. After Waverly was in bed, Corinna sat back down at the kitchen table. She opened her notepad. She looked at the 4 asterisked items. She thought for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and began to write. The first asterisked item was a discrepancy in the traffic impact study Tollison Property Group had submitted with their development application. The study had been conducted by an engineering firm, Hartwell and Associates, that Corinna recognized, and not favorably. She had encountered Hartwell's work twice before on projects she'd consulted on, and both times the methodology had been, in her professional judgment, selectively convenient. The traffic counts in Tollison's study had been collected over a 4-day window in August, which was, as anyone familiar with the neighborhood would know, the quietest traffic month of the year, when the elementary school 2 streets over was closed and a significant portion of the area's families were on vacation. The study's projections did not account for the back-to-school traffic surge that turned the relevant intersection into a twice-daily gridlock point from September through June. This was not necessarily fraudulent. It might have been an oversight, but it was the kind of oversight that shaped conclusions in a very particular direction, and it was the kind of discrepancy that, if formally raised in public comment during the application review period, would require the Planning Commission to request a supplemental study before they could proceed. The second asterisked item was a setback variance Tollison was requesting. He wanted to build 6 feet closer to the property line on the eastern edge of the site than the municipal code allowed. The variance application cited a hardship related to the irregular shape of the lot. Corinna had pulled the original lot survey from the county recorder's office. It was public record, and had looked carefully at the lot dimensions. The hardship argument was, at best, a stretch. The lot was irregular, but not so irregular that a code-compliant design was impossible. What a code-compliant design would do was reduce the building's total footprint by approximately 8%, which would reduce the number of leasable commercial units by 2, which would reduce the project's projected revenue by something in the range of $40,000 to $60,000 annually, depending on lease rates. That was real money. It was also exactly the kind of variance that the Planning Commission granted routinely when no one objected, and denied with some frequency when the objection was well documented and professionally framed. The third asterisked item was a stormwater management plan that Corinna found incomplete. The site in question had a drainage gradient that directed runoff toward the northeast corner, which was directly adjacent to a residential property. The submitted plan showed a detention basin, but the basin's calculated capacity appeared, based on Corinna's reading of the county's own stormwater management standards, which she knew by heart from years of consulting work, to be sized for a 10-year storm event rather than the 25-year event the code required for commercial projects of this scale. If the basin was undersized, the downstream residential property was at elevated risk of flooding during significant rain events. This was not a minor technicality. This was a public safety concern with a specific and identifiable impact on a specific and identifiable property owner. The fourth asterisked item was the most interesting. Tollison Property Group had listed on the application that the project had undergone preliminary community outreach as required by the county's development review guidelines. The guidelines required that developers of commercial projects above a certain scale conduct at minimum one community information session and provide documented notification to property owners within 500 feet of the site. Corinna had checked the notification list submitted with the application. It was missing 6 addresses. One of those addresses was a church. One was a home occupied by an elderly woman named Harriet Osei, who had, according to Planning Commission records Corinna had reviewed, formally objected to 3 previous development proposals in the area and been a consistent and effective public commenter. Whether the omission of those 6 addresses from the notification list was intentional or administrative error was, strictly speaking, an open question, but the procedural consequence was not. If the outreach process was found to be deficient, the application review timeline would need to be reset. Corinna looked at her 4 asterisked items for a long time. She was not a person who did things recklessly. She did not fire arrows into the dark and hope they found targets. Everything she did in professional life was deliberate, documented, and grounded in fact, because she had learned early that precision was the only tool that held its edge. What she was looking at was not a weapon. It was a set of legitimate, factual, public interest concerns about a development application that affected her neighborhood, a neighborhood that included her home, her daughter's school route, the street she had lived on for 9 years. Every one of those concerns was real. Every one of them was the kind of thing that, in a properly functioning public review process, should be raised and addressed. The fact that the person whose application would be delayed, complicated, and potentially fundamentally altered by the raising of those concerns was the same person who had parked across her driveway that morning. That was not the reason she was going to raise them. She was going to raise them because they were true, because they were legitimate, and because she was a professional with both the expertise and the standing to raise them. The fact that Derek Tollison had spent a morning treating her property as an extension of his own convenience and was now going to spend considerably longer dealing with the consequences of having done so was simply what Corinna's mother would have called the natural geometry of things. You take a thing that isn't yours, and the world has a way of taking something back. She began to write the public comment letter at 9:47 in the evening. She finished the first draft at 12:30. She revised it twice, checking every citation against primary sources, every code reference against the current municipal ordinance text, every factual claim against the documents she had physically reviewed at the planning office. At 1:15 in the morning she printed it, read it once more on paper with a pen in hand, made 4 small edits, and set it on the kitchen table. It was 11 pages. It was immaculate. She went to bed. She slept without difficulty, the specific deep sleep of someone who has made a decision they are at peace with. Outside, Aldermore Lane was quiet and dark and entirely undramatic, which was, Corinna thought, just before she fell asleep, exactly how things ought to be. She mailed the letter the next morning, certified, with return receipt, addressed to the chair of the Planning Commission, with copies to each individual commissioner, the county planning director, the city attorney's office, and, because the stormwater concern involved a potential public safety issue, the county engineer. She also emailed a copy to Harriet Osei, whom she had found through the Planning Commission's public comment archives, introducing herself and summarizing the notification deficiency. Harriet Osei responded within 40 minutes with a message that consisted of 3 sentences. I knew something was wrong with that process. I never received anything. What do we do next? Corinna wrote back. She explained. She suggested that Harriet, as a property owner within the notification radius who had not been properly notified, had standing to formally request that the outreach process be restarted. She attached the relevant section of the county's development review guidelines. She did not tell Harriet what to do. She gave her the information and let her decide. Harriet decided within the hour. She sent her own letter to the Planning Commission that afternoon. It was 2 pages, handwritten and absolutely clear in its argument. The Planning Commission's response to Corinna's letter arrived 8 days later. They had reviewed her comments and determined that, in light of the concerns raised regarding the traffic study methodology, the stormwater management plan sizing, and the notification process deficiency, the application review would be placed on administrative hold pending supplemental submissions from the applicant. The hold was indefinite. The applicant would have 60 days to submit the supplemental materials, after which the review clock would restart from the beginning. 60 days, plus the remaining weeks of the original review period, plus the additional time required for the Commission to schedule and conduct a new community information session, the project had been delayed by a minimum of 4 months, possibly longer depending on what the supplemental traffic study revealed and whether the stormwater plan could be revised to meet code. Corinna did the rough math. 4 months of delay on a commercial development project of that scale meant, conservatively, somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 in carrying costs for the developer, depending on their financing structure. She did not know Tollison's specific numbers. She knew the general shape of them. She was in her kitchen eating breakfast when the call came. Ms. Marsh. His voice was different now. The confidence was still there, because men like Derek Tollison did not shed their confidence easily, but beneath it was something she had not heard in their first conversation. Something careful. "I'd like to meet." "All right," she said. "When?" "Today, if possible. There's a coffee place on Meridian." "I know it," she said. 11 o'clock. 11 works. He was there when she arrived, already seated at a corner table with a black coffee in front of him, and the expression of a man who had spent the intervening days running calculations and not liking where they came out. He was bigger in person than his magazine photograph had suggested. Broad-shouldered, with thick, gray-flecked hair and the ruddy, outdoor complexion of someone who spent time on construction sites. He rose when she approached the table, which she noted. He gestured to the chair across from him, which she also noted. She sat. She ordered a tea. She waited. "I owe you an apology," he said, and she could hear what it cost him, not because he was a bad person necessarily, but because he was a person who did not often find himself in the position of owing anything. "The parking thing was inconsiderate. I was running late for a meeting and I made a poor decision." "You did," she said. "I didn't know it was your driveway specifically," he said. "I want you to understand that." "It wouldn't have been relevant," she said. "It was someone's driveway. That's sufficient." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite respect, but the precursor to it. "Fair point," he said. She waited again. "I've been in contact with my attorney about the Planning Commission situation," he said. "He's reviewed your letter." "I would expect so," she said. "He says your points are well-founded," Derek said, and the words came out with the particular deliberateness of a man reading from a script he has memorized and hates. "He says the traffic study issue in particular is a legitimate concern." "It is," she said. "We'll be commissioning a new study," he said. "A proper one, with counts taken in October." "That would be appropriate." He looked at her across the table, and she looked back, and in the silence between them, something was being acknowledged that neither of them put into words, because neither of them needed to. He had looked at her street and seen something convenient and available, and she had turned out to be neither of those things. "Is there anything," he said carefully, that we could do to address your concerns more directly, beyond the supplemental submissions?"